Hi everyone, it's Amy and welcome to the channel, or welcome back. I hope that you're doing well. Let me know how you're doing in the comments. Today we are talking about the 10 books that define my taste. And what I mean by that is I've combed through, as much as I remember, the books that I have read throughout my life, and especially the last couple of years when I've become an avid reader, and tried to pick out the books that I feel like really call out to me as far as what I feel like my reading tastes are really about. And this is sort of like what my heart just kind of gravitate towards. And even though I'm always wanting to expand my mind and my reading experience and trying different things, this is what I feel like I tend to gravitate towards. And I've got a few different genres. There's definitely a concentration of fantasy, but there's a little bit of variation in there, including rom-coms and speculative fiction, graphic novels. Let's get into this list, and I hope that you enjoy. First up is probably my favorite book of all time, and if you've seen my previous videos, you probably know what I'm going to say. That is The City of Brass by S.A. Chakraborty. And this is really kind of encompassing the whole Daevabad trilogy as a whole, but The City of Brass, of course, being the first book of the trilogy, was my first taste of this trilogy, and I just fell in love, and it really got me back into reading and making reading kind of this avid hobby that I am now a part of. And this is such a unique fantasy in that it is Middle Eastern inspired, and it is just such a beautiful and immersive world that Chakraborty has created. I think one of the strongest aspects of this trilogy and this book is that we have some really strong character work, and the characters are lovable yet very flawed at the same time. There's times when you're just like screaming at them in frustration, and times when you are throwing up your hands and saying, let's go, yeah. It's just kind of all over the map. And definitely with our main female character, Nari, who the story is really centered around, even though we do switch between POVs as the story goes. Nari is a character that I really love in that she is flawed, but you see her going through some really tough situations and trying to navigate it as best as she can, even though she has her own prejudice and own kind of ideas and philosophies. And I just feel like you really identify with her in her struggles because she's in some really tough situations. There is definitely a lot of complexity to this book and this series. There is definitely a lot of complex court politics, government politics. There is a lot of ethnic and racial tension and oppression. There are multiple races and ethnicities within this one city that the book is concentrated in. And there's so much history there as well. You really feel that Chakraborty has done her research to build out not just these different classes and races and everything, but that there's just the depth of history in these books. You feel like it goes back hundreds of thousands of years. It just creates such a rich world, but there's definitely, because of that, a lot of complexity to it. And there's even complex religious issues and coming down to just relational issues. So there's definitely a lot of complexity, but I feel like that makes the book so rich and immersive. You just want to know what's going to happen next and just trying to wrap your head around this whole world. I know everyone kind of has different experiences with this. I even heard some people kind of call this a YA sort of fantasy. It's definitely not. It is adult in its themes, its violence, and things like that. I think because it is fast-paced at times, and that there is definitely like drama and stuff in there, but it doesn't feel like melodramatic. It is the drama of politics and war and violence, and there is just so much in there. There's constant tension all the time, and I definitely just I ate it up. I read these back to back, which I feel like is rare for me to do when it comes to fantasies. I just loved this so much that I wanted to know what was going to happen next. I had to read the next book. And with the City of Brass, it was like getting the first taste of that. All this political tension and relational issues. I just ate it up. Again, the world is just so immersive, and we are in this magical city with a very unique magic system. We have jinn and other magical creatures that Chakraborty has created, and a lot of it is very much rooted in Middle Eastern mythology and folklore. And I just love how well researched she is, in that you feel like you are in a magical city in the Middle East, and there's definitely Middle Eastern inspiration with the complex politics and everything, and you feel that within this city and within the magic. And I love it so much. I'm gonna probably say that a million times throughout this video, but the fact that the magic feels so unique from pretty much any other fantasy book that I've read, it makes it really stand out on its own, in my opinion. And of course, this story is very action-packed. There is definitely violence and political uprising and battles, and the world just kind of grows and expands throughout the trilogy. But of course, again, coming back to the City of Brass, with it being where it all starts, you can even feel that tension in the first book. It's not something that comes later on. You feel all of this tension boiling below the surface, and it just grows and expands as the series goes on. But it is it is tension that confronts you, and yet you eat it up at the same time. It's definitely this kind of juxtaposition that you feel, and I just love that about the story. When it comes down to it, what I loved, I think, most about this story was that it showed me that fantasy can do so much more than just a typical European inspired setting, and that there can be really complex politics that reflect the real world, but are put into a setting where maybe it's easier to digest, even though it's very difficult to read at times, in that it is violent and confrontive. It is, put in this fantasy world where you feel like you're able to immerse yourself in it and yet relate to it at the same time. And I feel like it really opens your mind to what is going on in the world and makes you empathetic to situations going on in the world. And the fact that a fantasy book can do that, I think, just speaks to the power of the writing that Chakraborty does. I don't think I can say enough about this, but I just absolutely love this book. Next on my list is The Royal Assassin by Robin Hobb. This is the second book in the Farseer trilogy, which is the first trilogy of her whole universe, The Realm of the Elderlings. I am currently on the second series in this universe, The Live Ship Traders, and am absolutely enjoying it, even though it is completely different characters, but it's got like pirate vibes, and I absolutely love that. I'll talk more about that later. But this series I just absolutely loved, and I really love this second book. It is so action-packed, and there's just so much that happens in this book. I think it is the strongest of this trilogy. As I'm talking about this, even as I was talking about The City of Brass, I feel like I'm talking about the trilogy as a whole, but I definitely have my favorites within each series. But this is such an immersive world, and there is amazing character work and really unique magic. I really love Hobb's writing style. It is very unique in that it has a voice that feels like it's like this old world sort of English at times, and it immerses you even more within the world that she's created with the Six Duchies. The world that she has created, I know it expands as you go on in her universe, But even within the Farseer trilogy, you feel how well built out it is. And her writing style just really immerses you in this world that she's created. There is just so much depth to it. And the way that she writes it really just puts you in that place where you feel like you're in this kind of European inspired world and you're on these coasts, you're in these kind of dark stone castles, and it feels very kind of medieval inspired as well. And I just love that her writing style really puts you there. Hobbs really takes you through each emotion with each character, each relationship, each situation that comes up in these stories. I think her character work is unmatched. And the plots that she creates, everything is so well connected, but the journey that she takes you on is very emotional. It takes you from laughing out loud, literally, to just yelling in frustration. I have literally yelled out loud. I've read all of Hobbs' work and plan to all of her work with my husband, and we read it aloud. And I definitely recommend at least having a reading buddy that you read the book in tandem with, because you want to be able to express your emotions about these books. There are just moments where it is so frustrating and you need someone to talk about it with. It even brings you to heartbreaking moments. And I'm not really one to cry at like books or movies or anything like that, but there were definitely moments where I was about in tears. There is just such the range of emotions that she takes you through, and I think that's what makes her characters so compelling, is that you really go through it with them. And I love that so much. I really don't know what I'm going to do with myself once I get to the end of the Realm of the Elderlings, Robin Hobb's universe. I feel like it's going to be like losing a close friend, as I've seen other people express. Just being able to slowly go through her world and see it grow and expand, I feel like is going to be such an emotional journey. Just going through the first trilogy was so emotional, so I can only imagine what going through the rest of her work is going to be like. But I just love it so much, and I know it's going to be worth it. Next on my list is another high fantasy, but this is YA high fantasy, and that is Eldest by Christopher Paolini. This is the second book in the Inheritance cycle, or the Aragon series, and I chose the second book because I think it's the strongest of the series. There are 4 books in this series, but I feel like once we get into the second book, it doesn't have the sophomore slump like some series can have. I feel like the world is well developed and explained at this point, and now we're kind of getting into like some magical training, and we are getting into more depth with the characters and with the different magical races that are in this. But I love this book and this series because it just has such a classic fantasy feel to it. So we're following, of course, Aragon, who is our central hero of the story, and you definitely go on a coming of age sort of journey with Aragon, and just the different things that he has to face, and just how he really kind of has to grow up and accept really challenging roles and situations is definitely thought-provoking and confronting. I feel like Paolini does it in a very effective way, even though we're dealing with fantastical elements and magic and everything. But I definitely love how he portrays this sort of coming of age within not just Aragon as a character, but his relationship with his dragon, Saphira. Aragon and Saphira are just the dynamic duo. I love Saphira as a character. She is definitely funny and she is sassy, but she is also wise at the same time. The dragons of this world are definitely very wise. But I just love how each magical creature, each magical race in this world is very unique and has their own culture and sort of identity. We have elves, we have dwarves, we have some other magical creatures like werecats, who are these sort of like large cats that can talk and have their own magical abilities. I think that's probably my favorite part of the series, just dealing with these different magical creatures and races. And I think my favorite is probably the dwarves. Even though I love the dragons, the dwarves just had such a kind of classic dwarven feel to them that I almost feel like is reminiscent of like the Lord of the Rings. They were funny. They were, living underground. They were mining these beautiful jewels, and they just had such a rich history and culture. Each of the magical races had their own history and culture, and I just really loved the depth of that Paolini created. I think I love this because it just has the classical fantasy feel to it, even though it is YA, but you're still getting like battle, war, definitely the violence of a classic fantasy. It just is such a well-rounded and crafted world, definitely strong crafted characters, and I just love it. Now, moving on from high fantasy, we're kind of moving into fantasy that borders on literary fiction. And I am talking about Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. This is such an interesting book. It is very atmospheric. It's whimsical yet dark, and it's not very plot driven. It's definitely more about the vibes, but it is such a beautiful book. So we're dealing with kind of a complex magical competition that is set in a circus that is about two magicians who are kind of pinned against each other from childhood. And it is a really strange sort of situation. You just kind of go through the experience of seeing the stories of all the different characters who are connected to this magical circus, from the magicians who are competing to the other entertainers of the circus, to the people who help run the circus, people that attend the circus. There's just this kind of whole world that revolves around it. And it is very complex, interesting. At times, you're not quite sure what's going on, and things just so slowly sort of piece themselves together. And as you're going through this kind of strange, ambiguous plot and getting kind of snapshots of these different characters connected to the circus, you're getting to see Morgenstern's imagination as she creates these beautiful scenes that are the different acts of the circus. She creates almost worlds within the circus that are just beautiful and magical and whimsical. The descriptions that she has are so vivid, and it's almost like, how can someone think that up? And I've heard I've heard someone say that this would be a perfect movie for Tim Burton to do, and I honestly would totally get behind that. I feel like it is kind of that sort of dark and slightly eerie sort of world that Tim Burton could make come to life. But the magical circus acts that she comes up with just are kind of mind blowing. And I feel like that really speaks to just the whole beautiful, strange experience that you go through with this book. And I feel like that sort of story, the sort of strange literary fiction, I feel like kind of speaks to me in a strange way, and I feel like this book is very representative of that. Next up is a book that really represents my love of pirate books, and that is Fable by Adrienne Young. This is the first of the World of the Narrows series. This is a YA pirate fantasy that's kind of light on the fantasy, but it still is a really fun, slightly brooding pirate story, and I just absolutely love it. So in this story, we are following a strong female main character named Fable as she's having to navigate the world of the Narrows, this kind of collection of islands, a coast where she is having to deal with kind of the harsh reality of a world of traders, or more kind of pirates. And it's a really like cutthroat kind of world. It is a little bit dark and brooding. You definitely have characters who are a hard shell on the outside, as I feel like most pirate characters would be. and she is a young woman having to navigate this world. This story does have a great romance subplot. I really love the characters kind of back and forth. And this is a duology that also has a prequel that also has its own romance story. I just really loved this world and the high seas adventure. I feel like it's a bit light on the fantasy, like I said, but it does have some really unique magic in it. You're kind of dealing with diving for jewels and special abilities and things like that. So I don't want to give too much away about it. I'm trying not to give too much plot as I'm talking about these books, but just trying to give you the different themes and constructs and my feelings about it. But I really love that you're kind of dealing with the weird politics of the marketplace and business. There's definitely politics when you're dealing with like traders and pirates, and there's kind of this whole like hierarchy system to this world within these traders, and it's very interesting, and it definitely creates the conflict of the book. These are fairly fast-paced stories, and I listened to the audiobooks of these in a very short span of time. I think maybe a week and a half. I just ate them up. I loved these stories so much, but obviously it started with Fable where I fell in love with it and just wanted more of it. It really speaks to my love of pirate stories. I feel like this was kind of my first, not really first step into loving pirates, but where I really was like, yeah, I do really love pirate stories. And it just sparked from there. I literally have on my Goodreads a whole list labeled just pirate books for my TBR. So if you're interested in that, you could check out my Goodreads and find more pirate books. But I love them and I think they're so much fun. Another genre or kind of sub-genre of fantasy that I really love is cozy fantasy. And for me, I think the quintessential example for me would be The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. This is a great cozy fantasy that has a wonderful found family and a really sweet queer romance subplot. This story is really about the cast of characters, including some orphan children who are magical beings, and they all have unique personalities, and you're really getting to explore a story about acceptance and love and overcoming. And you're getting to see it through the eyes of a social worker who's kind of closed off and just seeing how he develops throughout the story. But this really is focused on the characters. And we are in kind of a cozy setting. We're on this sort of secluded kind of island off the coast of a small town. And this orphanage is kind of isolated with these magical beings. You really go through an emotional journey. I feel like that might be the theme of a lot of the books that I love, is that it really takes me on a journey emotionally. But there are definitely funny moments. There is so much like witty humor that these characters have, especially the children. And you are definitely going to have like heartwarming moments and moments that really tug on the heartstrings as well. I love the emotional complexity of this story, and it was just so heartwarming. I remember reading it at a time when I wasn't feeling well. I just remember laying in bed and, was maybe having to do something, get up, get away from the book. And I really didn't want to. I did not want to put down the book because I wanted to be in this cozy world with these magical kids and all of the love and vibes of the book. I loved it so much. I know I've probably said that so many times already, but this is definitely a book that made me love cozy fantasy and made me want more stories like this. I cannot wait to read the sequel of this book, Somewhere Beyond the Sea, which is already out now. And I can't wait to get my hands on it. I have been seeing like the press tours and everything and am so excited about it. Now, deviating from fantasy, I am definitely known to enjoy a rom-com in between fantasies and kind of my heavier reads. And I feel like a great example of my taste in rom-coms is Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez. This is such a sweet story that is obviously perfect for the summertime, but I feel like you can enjoy it year-round. This is just a really great rom-com that has some emotional depth. Yes, we're going on an emotional journey as I'm going with all the books on this list, but I just really enjoyed this book. And even though it has a bit of a silly premise, it still does have that depth to it. So we're following a man and a woman who meet up through a Reddit thread, and they connect because they have a similar dating curse where when they break up, their exes go on to find their soulmates. And so they sort of partner up and are like, okay, maybe if we date each other, it'll get rid of this curse. So yes, kind of a silly premise, but I feel like that is just kind of classic thing with rom-coms. Maybe it's a silly premise, maybe there's a funny element to it, but you definitely get to explore some deep issues with each character. They each have their own issues that they deal with, and I really loved that about the story, that they were having to go on their own journeys, but really were wanting to be the best versions of themselves for each other. We are definitely exploring the topics of trauma and mental health, but I feel like it's done in a really beautiful way. There are definitely like family issues and the sort of trauma that that can bring. And I just really thought this was a beautiful story once I reached the end. It was like, wow, we really went on a journey with these characters, and there were so many unique situations that were explored, but I still feel like we're really relatable. And I think that's what I really love about rom-coms. It's that they can be light and fluffy, and maybe they don't always have this kind of depth to it, but I feel like the ones that I really connect with are the ones that do explore these kind of emotional issues. And I feel like they're just really great palate cleansers. And it's also something that I feel like impacts me emotionally and gets me to think about my own life and how I connect with other people. And yeah, I just really love a rom-com every now and then. Now, speaking of emotional journeys, this next book, it is a sci-fi speculative fiction that I'm pretty sure I actually cried to while I was reading it, which, like I said earlier, is very rare and unusual for me to do. And this is Set My Heart to Five by Simon Stevenson. We're following the story of a robot who develops human emotions, and it is really an exploration of what it means to be a human and just really going on a life journey with him. It is so beautiful. It is hilarious. It is heart-wrenching, but so heartwarming at the same time. And I really love the writing style that Stevenson chose. It is really like you are getting into the mind of a robot. It's almost like typed out in this sort of like analog sort of way where it feels like you are reading kind of the mind of a robot. I don't know quite how to explain it. It's kind of a visual experience. You really are getting to see this sort of character come to life and come to connect with human emotions and just the journey that he goes on. There are so many crazy situations that he gets into. There are so many situations that you relate to because they're just part of the human experience, from having discord with people to life-threatening situations to friendships and love and just wanting to understand who you are at your core. It is so beautiful. It is weird and quirky, but it is so beautiful at the same time. I really love the main character of this story, even though it is a robot. He definitely has his own personality, and you see that develop as the story goes on. And I feel like it really was a story that made you appreciate life. I feel like maybe I'm being redundant. I just remember the heartbreaking moments of this story and just being brought to this place of, oh my gosh, like being confronted with such strong emotions. And it really just made me appreciate being a human. Next on my list is a graphic novel, The Tea Dragon Society. This is actually a trilogy of graphic novels, but I definitely fell in love with it with the first book, and this is by Kay O'Neill. This is definitely a cozy fantasy graphic novel, and I love a cute graphic novel with fantasy elements to it. We are following characters who are taking care of these magical tea dragons who literally grow tea leaves with magical properties on their bodies. And the art in these graphic novels is so beautiful and cute at the same time. And yes, we do go on emotional journeys with these characters. It's definitely about self exploration and self acceptance. And we do have some like kind of coming of age stories, but there's also relationship stories as well. There's some queer representation. I just really love a good, cozy graphic novel. And I've also read some manga that is more intense, but I feel like this is what I tend to gravitate towards. It's just a good, cozy fantasy. And I have read a little bit more of Kay O'Neill's writing and definitely want to read more. I just really enjoy them. But if you are wanting a cozy fantasy graphic novel, I definitely would suggest these. My last book on this list is going back to fantasy, and that is Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban by J.K. Rowling. This is probably one of the books that solidified my love of fantasy. I remember kind of reading the book and then seeing the movie like within a short time frame, and I was just so obsessed with Harry Potter. I remember going to see like the movies when I was about the same age as the characters, so I definitely felt like I was growing up with them. But this is definitely my favorite book of this series because I just felt such an emotional connection with it. But I mean, I don't think I need to say too much about Harry Potter because it is so popular. But I just had such a special connection with this, and it is just a classic for obviously a very good reason. It is well beloved, but just getting the magic school and the wizards and just this wonderful immersive world, and you're getting good versus evil with, you know, Harry being our hero and of course Voldemort and his Death Eaters. But you know, we're exploring so much more in this book in dealing with Sirius, who is kind of this sort of almost like lost uncle, lost guardian character to Harry, and just the emotional journey. There it is again, the emotional journey that Harry has to go on with kind of confronting the past and things that he doesn't fully understand. But there's definitely like some growing up that happens in this story. You know, we're kind of becoming teenagers, and there's definitely like, you know, teenage angst and emotions that are in this story. And I definitely identified with that at this age. I was so obsessed with this book and definitely the movie. I remember I wanted to be like Hermione, and I even got my hair permed when I was in eighth grade, which was around the time when I was reading this and watching the movie. I got my hair permed to be like her kind of wavy, curly hair. Um, I was definitely just a huge nerd about Harry Potter. I think this really represents my love of kind of the middle grade fantasy world, and I have definitely grown to love more books in this genre, but I feel like this is very representative of my love for middle grade fantasy. So I think that's going to round out my list of my 10 books that define my taste. So there it is, guys. There is the list. I hope that you enjoyed this as much as I did. I really enjoyed kind of getting to talk about these and reminisce about why I love them so much. And I definitely feel like these are all representative of the different genres and books that really speak to me and express what my taste is in reading. And I hope that there are books that we relate on within this list. And if there are ones that you haven't read that sound interesting to you, definitely let me know in the comments. And if you have read them, let me know what you thought about them. But again, I hope that you enjoyed this as much as I did, and I will see you guys soon. Bye!